Well, I wanted to welcome everyone to the Joukowsky Institute for Archaeology and the Ancient Worlds webinar on applying to graduate school. We hope this will be useful for all of you that are sort of attending, and we want this to sort of serve especially folks that might be applying this year, but also for folks that might be interested in applying in future years or to other archaeology programs in general. And what we're going to do is just start off with sort of introductions of the panelists. And I'm Professor Andrew Scherer. I'm the director here at the Joukowsky Institute. And we all also have departmental homes. And my departmental home is in the Department of Anthropology. I'm an archaeologist that works in Guatemala and Mexico. And my research is especially on the classic period Maya. And I currently have a book project that's sort of about to go in press that's on sort of the morality of violence among the classic period Maya. I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague, Laurel Bestock.
Thanks, Andrew, and hi, everyone. We're so glad you could join all of us. I'm Laurel Bestock. I'm an Egyptologist and archaeologist. As Andrew said, my department home is in Egyptology, but I'm really in both units, and I'm also associated with art history. My field research is primarily in Egypt and Sudan because of the current political situation in Sudan. I am not actually in the field this season, but continuing to work on the materials we have excavated. I also am part of a team developing tablet-based field recording software that is now used by quite a handful of projects from different universities, not just Brown. I will hand the mic over to my colleague, Yannis Hamilakis.
Hi all, welcome, and I'm very glad we have this opportunity to communicate with you all. With some of you have already exchanged messages, but it's nice to have this time to discuss the various issues to do with admission and the various matters. So my research is to do with the materiality of the body and the senses, the archaeology of the bodily senses, social memory and material memory, but also matters to do with the politics of the past and the present, issues to do with nationalism, colonialism, race, and racism in relation to archaeology. I work in Greece. I work in the prehistoric Aegean, and I co-direct an excavation of a primarily Neolithic site in Thessaly called Koutrelou Magula. But at the same time, I do engage in various other projects that are to do with different periods. One of my main ones for the past few years is the project on the archaeology of contemporary migration in the Mediterranean with a focus on the Aegean border. And I work on the island of Lesbos. One of my writing projects at the moment is a book on the refugee camp, the destroyed refugee camp of Moria on the island of Lesbos. My last book was on archaeology, nation, and race, comparing the nation states of Greece and Israel and addressing matters to do with colonization and whiteness. And it was co-authored with Professor Rafi Greenberg from the University of Tel Aviv. Thanks. And I'll pass it over to Mason to introduce himself.
Thanks, Yannis. My name is Mason Shrader. I am a first-year Ph.D. student in the Joukowsky Institute. I am a bioarchaeologist interested in paleopathology and specifically disability and impairment in late antiquity, so early Christianity. And I am most recently, I have worked in Corinth, Greece, and plan to continue to do so. And I will throw it over to Anna.
Hi, all. I'm Anna. I am a PhD candidate here at the Joukowsky, and my research and the dissertation I'm currently writing focus on the social and spatial dynamics of Etruscan craft production, and I currently excavate in Sardinia with one of our other professors, Peter van Domelen. So just to orient everyone that's tuned in, today Mason and I are going to be the moderators of this panel discussion, and we've got two sections here for you. We'll start out with a shorter discussion specifically focused on the Joukowsky Institute here at Brown and applying to its PhD program specifically. And then we'll have a bit of a longer discussion with advice for applying to graduate programs in archaeology more generally. So Mason will start us off with our first question for the faculty.
Yeah, thank you. So this first question is for Andrew. So we have several archaeologists across several different departments here at Brown, as we sort of showed with our overview here. What is the role of the Institute in this broader picture at Brown, and what kind of interest does its graduate program support?
So, yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, as our sort of faculty introduction sort of underscored, you have three faculty here who have three different sort of departmental homes. And that's indeed, you have anthropologists in Egyptology and Assyriology, you have archaeologists in classics and modern Greek study, you've got archaeologists in the history of art and architecture, and also archaeologists in anthropology. And what the Joukowsky does is it brings a number of us sort of together, sort of under one sort of roof, literally Rhode Island Hall, to sort of collaborate on both an undergraduate and graduate program that sort of in its current form is this particularly focused on sort of the Mediterranean, kind of writ large. And so, but beyond just those teaching programs, the undergraduate and graduate program, there's a tremendous amount of sort of synergistic activity that also happens here in Rhode Island Hall. We tend to have at least one big conference every semester that sort of connects in some way to either archaeology and or sort of the ancient world. And both of these are sort of topics that are sort of constantly under sort of revision. What does it really mean to do archaeology? What really is the sort of the ancient world? And it's especially sort of connecting to folks that are doing both sort of archaeology in many of the different places at Brown, but also folks that are sort of studying sort of the ancient world, whether that might be philologists working with texts, whether that might be art historians working with images. Really one of the goals is sort of to push sort of teaching and research in those two areas here at the Institute.
Great. And so kind of, I guess, building on this discussion of interdisciplinarity, and we've got people from multiple backgrounds coming in, I want to ask Laurel a question specifically about what kind of careers students might be preparing for applying to a program like the Joukowskys.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I mean, honestly, this interdisciplinarity plays out in the career paths of our students after they graduate without question. They're pretty diverse. It's true that many of our students enter the academic world, and we've been really successful in having students who want to do that get tenure track jobs, usually after a postdoc or two. Those students end up everywhere from teaching classics, including language, to art history programs, to archaeology or anthropology programs. But we also have lots of students who don't follow like sort of a strict academic pathline. We've a number of PhD graduates who've gone on to curate at museums, both large and small. We have students who've gone on to work in cultural resources management or other heritage-based archaeological stuff. And also this program is really good at preparing students for even alt academic careers. So Brown has a program to help students who are interested in entering academic administration move towards that, for instance. So both the academic program and the breadth and interdisciplinarity of the program in the PhD in archaeology, but also other resources at Brown, ways that Joukowsky is connected to the community, they offer paths towards a variety of careers.
Excellent. And Yannis, I was wondering if you could speak about some of the diversity in the Institute, specifically how the Institute supports students from diverse backgrounds, students of color, students from Indigenous communities, international students, and students with disabilities.
Yeah, thank you, Mason. I mean, as you, many of you know, matters to do with diversity are taken extremely seriously in this university, as in many other universities and in this institute. We have the broader discussion that is happening at the university level that is often linked to federal definitions to do with underrepresented groups. historical represented groups. And we're, of course, taking all that seriously into account, but we do have our own internal discussions and our own internal diversity and inclusion committee that I coordinate and chair. And the job of that committee is to make all that discussion specific to archaeology, to understand how matters to do with underrepresentation of certain social groups can be addressed concretely and specifically within archaeology. So what we do practically is to have that discussion constantly ongoing. We have these kind of debates in the committee open to all. There is representation by graduate students in that committee, and they regularly bring up issues which we take seriously into account. We are constantly trying to diversify the faculty body, the postdoc body, and of course the student body as well, all the different communities. So every time we have a selection process ahead of us, we engage seriously in discussion on how to make that selection process more equitable and also open to people coming from unconventional backgrounds. You mentioned people of color, you mentioned people with disabilities, you mentioned people from other backgrounds. We also consider matters to do with opportunity and social class and first generation students who do not have the financial and other means to go into archaeology, especially when parts of archaeology like fieldwork is extremely expensive. So all those matters are important. And practically, we also try to always come up with financial means of support in the institutes and at the university to offer micro grants, to offer financial help, to point people to other resources they can actually tap into, to allow them to go on fieldwork. So any student who join us will have the opportunity to go into various field projects, and we will make sure that they have the financial means to do so. And at the same time, as I said, we work on the broader structural matters. And I want also to emphasize that for us, diversity is also a matter of curriculum. So we regularly and periodically look at what we offer in courses and the various activities. And we try to always come up with new courses and new themes that would include matters of diversity. Finally, our invited speakers come from diverse backgrounds. And this year, we're also starting a cycle of lectures that are specifically to do with diversity. And we have a list of colleagues who are going to be visiting us in the Institute, giving lectures on that topic. And of course, at the university level, there are many centers, institutes, and other structures that actually address those matters. And we are reaching out to them all the time and develop collaboration. So lots happening all the time, and we're very keen to continue doing so, continue kind of supporting diverse students.
So I just want to pick up on one little point you made, Yannis, and make sure it gets emphasized, which is this financial support point, which is really important for equity for students coming in. We do not accept students unless we fund them fully. So every student who's coming into the PhD program at Brown has a package, and the graduate students can maybe answer better how totally that supports your life, but it's pretty generous. It's designed to allow you to live and study and be a human being and an adult. And it comes with health insurance, for instance, as well. So the additional support for going on field work that Yannis mentions is really important, but just as a matter of equity, you're not paying for doing your PhD at Brown. Brown is paying you to do your PhD at Brown.
Thank you, Laura. I think this is extremely important, especially for people from Europe, because as we know, the system there is very different and people pay very often out of their own pocket to go to the graduate school, or they have to earn one of the very, very few scholarships on a competitive basis. So here, once you're accepted, you have the whole package. A final minor point, and I will shut up. This university recently had, I think, had a very important development for graduate students, and that's the formation of a student union amongst graduate students. And I think that's an extremely important and welcome development, because graduate students have the opportunity to negotiate the stipend and the support from the university on an annual basis. And that has already shown its benefits for them. So I think that's an important also issue to mention.
Great. That kind of concludes our discussion of the Institute specifically, but we're going to keep bringing up the Institute's application cycle and requirements as we talk more broadly about archaeology applications in general. Mason, do you want to get us going with that bit?
Yes. So I'll ask this to Laurel. What are those elements of the application and which carry the most weight? This is something that I know I was sort of wondering about when I applied to a PhD program. How do y'all actually weight the various elements?
Right? What do you have to put in your application and how we are going to read it? And I mean, I'll answer this on a broad level, but I think we should dive in more specifically to elements of that. But you know, as a full picture, your application is going to include a personal statement, which is a letter from you to the faculty committee who's considering applications, that talks about what you want to do and why, and how it relates to what you've done in the past. And why specifically the particular university you're applying to. It's going to include your CV, so which is kind of like a formal transcript of what you've done, your transcripts, your actual grades and courses from your undergraduate work and any graduate work you've done. Letters of recommendation are a key part of your application that are submitted for you by those you ask. A writing sample is also included, and a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement is another part of the total package. And Mason, I totally hear you that you're anxious when you're applying, and it's like, oh my God, what are they going to read with most weight? I'm not sure if it's reassuring to hear, but the answer I would give is that a successful application is one that balances these parts, where they really work together, so none of them is out on its own. It's really a full package that shows us that you are a well-prepared, excited individual who has been thoughtful, not just in applying, but in sort of getting the experiences that lead towards applying. And so, you know, when we see these threads running, you've taken the classes that you're speaking about in your letter, your letter writers are people who are related to these experiences, then we get a real sense of you as a person who is prepared for and will fit well here. And I think every university is going to read these applications similarly in that sense. Holistically, the parts fit together.
If I can just jump in there with one sort of additional point to what Professor Bestock had to say is, and one of the things that's sort of we're really trying to be mindful moving forward, especially in the spirit of some of the issues of diversity, inclusiveness, and equity that Professor Hamilakis had talked about, is, you know, what we're not looking for is, did you go to the right university? Did you study with the right person? That kind of thing. What we really want to do is start with that personal statement and see, is there really a sort of a compelling sort of narrative about why you should be in graduate school, sort of studying with us at the Tchaikovsky Institute. So it is indeed, all of that stuff totally matters. And so, you know, it all is part of that puzzle. But what's important is that we're not looking for sort of certain boxes of where you at the right university, did you study with the right person, that kind of thing.
Totally. And that reminds me to add that one thing that is not in the application is GRE scores. So Brown has dropped those entirely recently. We are not interested in your GRE scores. Those are totally, they're basically racist. So we're not going to take those into consideration. In terms of other scores, if you are a non-native English speaker and you're coming from a university where you were not using English as the language of instruction, then Brown does require TOEFL scores. What TOEFL scores we're looking for, I think Brown itself has a cutoff at like 90 on the internet-based one, 577 on the paper-based one. That's less of a hard, I mean, those are like absolute minimums. We don't have a sort of specific range we're looking for, but we do want to know that you can not just learn in English, but can communicate in English, because you're going to write a dissertation in English.
Great answers. Thank you so much. Let's go a bit more in depth into some of these various aspects. So we just had a question come in through the Q&A about personal statements and specifically indicating in the application what professor you'd like to work with. And I kind of want to broaden this out to a question that I'm going to direct at Yannis. Just about personal statements in general. What constitutes a good personal statement? How specific does it need to be with respect to your interests, what you want to do? And then again, that question of how specific do you have to be about who you want to work with?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, there are different views on what a great personal statement is. I'll tell you my own view, but I think, you know, my other colleagues may want to chip in and express their own. For me, a personal statement needs to show passion for the subject, you know, to actually explain why people want to spend 6 or 7 or 8 years of their life doing this. So that is crucial. So an indication of how that passion is expressed in terms of prior experiences, in terms of activities, in terms of ideas that people want to develop. Now, as we know, in the US system, you do not have to submit a very, very specific outline of your research project, especially your dissertation, your final dissertation project. But you do, it does help for you to indicate the broader area of interest, and also explain why that area of interest is important to you. Explain it in relation to your prior studies, to your prior experience, but also to your passion and your kind of the things that motivate you to continue doing graduate study. As far as the specific professor, you don't have to nominate a specific professor when you submit your statement. If you already have a person in mind and you're very keen to work with them, of course you do, you know, mention it, and many people do, in fact, many people, and more so. But you don't necessarily have, especially if you haven't decided. And we want people with an open mind all the time. We want people to come and join us and be able to take courses with all of us, understand and get to know our interests, join our field projects if you want to, of course, and progressively decide that there are certain people, person or many persons perhaps, and we have cases of co-advising and co-supervision that you want to work with. So there are people who already have decided, and other people who haven't decided, and they come and decide, you know, as they are in the program. But in both cases, we want people with, as I said, with an open mind and an ability and willingness to learn from all of us.
Can I jump in and add something else too? It's really building on that, and even picking up something that came up in the Q&A, which there was a question about how many programs should you apply to, and it's totally related to this. What you shouldn't do is write the same application to 5 different programs if you're applying to 5 different programs. So even if you're not going to say, I want to work with this professor, if you're going to say, I'm excited by the totality of the program, and this is how I see myself fitting into it, apply to Brown and to Cornell and to UCLA, you know, as show that in your personal statement that you understand what makes the place you're applying unique and how you yourself are going to fit in there. I think that's way more important than saying a specific person. And yeah, I mean, in terms of Brown, it's a necessarily broad program. Even if you want to work with one of us more than the others, do please mention also how you see yourself benefiting from the bigger picture at Brown. You know, you might have wanted to be an Egyptian archaeologist since you were tiny, and you can say compellingly why you want to work on the same things I'm working on. But if you can't also say, and this is what I'm going to get from Professor Scherer, and this is what I'm going to get from Professor Hamilakis, then this isn't the best place for you. So show me that you understand that.
All right, and Andrew, a question for you. Many applications, including ours, ask for diversification. How should applicants go about answering this? I think it's particularly important to highlight this in light of the recent SCOTUS decision regarding diversity in admissions.
Yeah, so for folks that might not be familiar with the Supreme Court decision that Mason was referring to, is there's a recent case that was decided this summer that basically bans universities from making admissions decisions based specifically on sort of matters of race or ethnicity, that we cannot say we want to pick a particular candidate because of their particular race or ethnic sort of background. And this presents a challenge for universities like Brown, who are more broadly interested in maintaining a diverse student body and really supporting folks from sort of a diverse sort of background. And so this is in part what that statement is meant to do, is to sort of ensure our commitment to advancing sort of issues of diversity, inclusion, and sort of equity by letting applicants sort of speak about themselves and how they see either their own past experiences sort of impacting their capacity, to do graduate work, or another way of framing it is to think about how you see the work that you want to do here as a graduate student, sort of promoting those issues of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I think, for some folks, especially if you're coming to us from an international background where you might not be having some of these same conversations, this might sound sort of a little unusual or strange. And I think this goes back to, what Professor Hamilakis was talking about, is that when we're thinking about diversity, we aren't just talking about sort of race or ethnicity, but there are all these many different dimensions of diversity. And if you look at Brown's website, and the graduate program has information, and there's also in Brown's Office of Inclusion and Equity and Diversity, you can find a little bit more language about what it is that Brown is particularly looking for, thinking about. But this is a sort of, it is a really important statement, and to be clear, is when what we are and are not allowed to do in light of that Supreme Court decision is we can't say, okay, we want to get X number of students who might have East Asian background, or X number of students who might have European background or something like that. But what we can certainly do is, if a student has had a particular sort of experience, like, for example, overcoming adversity because of sort of racism that they've encountered, that is very much the kind of thing that we would like to hear about, because that's not the same thing as making a decision based on race. What we're doing is we're making a decision based on personal experience. And again, this is all based on sort of what we are and are not now allowed to do in light of that sort of Supreme Court decision, but are very much what thing that has not changed at Brown, has not changed at the Joukowsky Institute, is we are broadly interested in promoting a diverse student body, one that is equitable, and one that creates a sort of a spirit of sort of inclusiveness among all of the students who are all here.
Awesome. Hopefully that's helpful, because I know that bit can be a bit confusing. I remember writing a diversity statement even back when I applied, and it's hard to know what is being looked for.
Yeah, and I should really underscore, there's no like set formula about what makes a good one of these statements. And so it's a chance to be sort of creative, but again, making sure that you sort of address, what's asked in the question prompt.
Great. Okay, so another portion of most applications that can be a bit opaque, I think, is the writing sample. And Laurel, I want to ask you this: what kind of writing samples are faculty looking for, and specifically, like, what can you use? Do they have to be new things? Can they be reworked? Like, what should be submitted for a writing sample?
Yeah, I can imagine that makes people nervous, and I'm not surprised. And I think maybe it helps even to frame it in terms of what part of you we're trying to understand through your writing sample. So what is it? How is this used? And this is really used to see that you write well in English. You do have to submit something in English, and that you can make an archaeological argument. So can you use evidence to make an argument? So rather than be too concerned about whether it's a course paper that you've reworked, very few of you will have publications yet. You're just applying to a PhD program. We don't expect to see something published. Rather think about it from, does this stand as evidence that I write well and think well in the topic for which I'm applying to the PhD? So the closer it is to what we're doing, that's actually more important than its length. You may rework it, of course. Again, we're not, it doesn't have to be frozen at the state at which you wrote it. You are using this to make a point within your application. But it can really be a diverse range of things that you've written. It could even be, if you're blogging, you can use a blog post. If it is something that speaks to what you want us to know about how you think about and have experienced archaeology, and if it's demonstration of your writing skills, it will be a good writing sample.
Thank you, Laurel. So we've had a couple of questions now in the Q&A about the language experience in language training and language requirements in the program. So to Yannis, I would ask, does previous language training affect the success of the applicant? And what kind of language training are we looking for?
Okay. Thank you, Mason. This is a question that occupies our meetings and our mind right now, because we are in the process of reflecting and thinking again on the language requirements of our students. And I'll say a few things, but I would ask both my colleagues to chip in if they want to add things, because I may not get everything right. We do believe in the value of languages and at our program. It is something that we do not make concessions, because we do believe it is important for our students to have a solid grounding in languages. Now, which languages is a matter of discussion and negotiation at the moment. You may know that in the most traditional departments, especially the ones who are doing old world archaeology or Mediterranean archaeology or classical archaeology, there was an expectation to be able to master ancient languages like Greek and Latin. And in our own program also, for many, many years, Greek and Latin was a prerequisite, and it was not a prerequisite, but it was something you had to do during your graduate programs, and it was extremely important. More recently, we've reduced the number of ancient languages to one, not two. And we give flexibility to people on what kind of ancient language do they want to choose, because there's a great variety of languages that are relevant to the cultures of the Mediterranean more broadly. And we want people to have that opportunity to be able to specialize and learn the language that's closer to their essential interest and the language that they feel more comfortable in learning to advance their own project and their own research aspirations. In terms of modern languages, the same discussion follows. There are certain, of course, languages that people consider extremely important academically because of the amount of literature. Beyond English, of course, French, German, perhaps other languages. We do emphasize the need to learn all those languages, but at the same time, again, we are broaden the range of languages that need to be learned, and people can choose and select other languages that are more relevant to their area of study, to their region, and to their specific research questions. We also insist that if they are to do, let's say, a Ph.D. in Italy on a topic to do with Italian archaeology, they should be able to learn, at least at a very basic communicate level, the language of that country. And that is important for us for two reasons. One is the epistemic reason, that there is literature, and we often forget that our colleagues in Mediterranean countries produce literature about the archaeology of that country, so they should be able to read it. And the other, of course, is ethical. We do want to train people who have gone past that kind of old-style colonial archaeology. We are in the business of decolonizing archaeology in the sense that we want people to be able to engage with colleagues in the countries where they work in their own language, communicate, actively organize community events and other activities. Now, we know that languages are difficult. We know that in the space of the graduate program, you may not be able to master those languages, but we do want people to have a good and solid grounding and then continue improving them. So these are just some thoughts about languages, but I'm sure there are many that Laurel and Andrew may want to add to.
Yeah, if I can just jump in, if you go on our website, you'll still see that there's 2 ancient languages sort of required, and that's because that shift in the language requirements is right now hasn't been made official. It has one final sort of hurdle that we're very sort of optimistic that will pass. And so the idea is that anybody who would come in this admission cycle is hopefully exactly what Professor Hamilakis had outlined will meet final sort of approval at the graduate school. And that's, again, so that the shift to one ancient language, but at the same time, an expectation that at least one of those modern languages is truly sort of it's beyond the level of just being able to translate a document, that you can sort of communicate in the country that you're working. And I think, the question that folks might be having is, okay, well, what do I need to get into the door there? And I think the answer to that is there's no sort of set answer, which is, I know, really frustrating if you're like trying to prepare for a graduate program, which is clearly if you have these languages in place, that's helpful and it's advantageous. But at the same time, we are recognized that you frequently need to come from a certain background to get access to, say, training in Latin or training in ancient Greek, and that there are students that we want at the Institute that might not have had that background. And so, this is something that we would be talking with you about during the application process and the admissions process is, can we see, is there a realistic path for you to get up to that training that you need to sort of meet the requirements and sort of do the work? And so you absolutely should still, reach out and consider applying if you don't have all those languages in place. But at the same time, if you are thinking about, doing Mediterranean archaeology, you might very well look at how you could get some of either or. That modern language training or that ancient language training always sort of helps. And I don't know if Professor Bestock, if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, totally. This is actually something I get all the time from potential applicants who are saying, I want to work on ancient Egypt. Should I apply to the Egyptology department or to the Joukowsky Institute at Brown? And my very first question is, have you taken Middle Egyptian yet? Lots of students are coming from places where they didn't have access to Middle Egyptian. You're highly unlikely to get into the language-heavy Egyptology PhD program without that. That's not a barrier to getting into the Joukowsky Institute. You can take Middle Egyptian while you're here. You can't get a PhD in Egyptian archaeology without knowing Middle Egyptian, but in terms of where that sits at the application stage, that can be really helpful to know that is true in practice, that's like a diverging thing there. So yeah, that's kind of my experience on that.
And I also add, because this is relevant to students who come from, whose language, English is not the first language, and they come already with another language. We've recently decided that we should count that language as part of our modern language requirements for students. So I think this is important. We do recognize that they have already tried hard to learn another language. It's important that their own language counts as one of the foreign languages.
Great. Hopefully that answered what is definitely a question that a lot of people have, especially seeing as we've had multiple Q&A questions already about it. I'm sure other people had the question as well. Let's see, our next question, which will be for Andrew, is about field experience. We're an archaeology program. What kind of field experiences are we or other programs maybe looking for? And what counts, right? Does museum work count? Does lab work count? In addition to things like excavation and survey?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, the answer to that question is somewhat parallel to the answer to the language question, which is, on one hand, any of that prior experience is really sort of wonderful if you've been able to get it, whether that's sort of field work, whether that's laboratory work, whether that's work with collections in a museum or, proctorship or something in a museum. But at the same time, we also recognize that there's inequalities in access to those experiences, and those were compounded by the COVID pandemic, right? That getting into the field was really difficult for folks in the height of the pandemic. And so that might very well be affecting some of you that is applying for graduate school. And so I think the thing to think about is, if you have those experiences, and again, whether that's field experience, whether that's laboratory experience, museum experience, all of that is sort of great experience. But if you don't have that experience but are interested in coming, you might think about how you can creatively showcase how you have similar sort of relevant experiences that might signal that you're well equipped to do any of those things. So for example, maybe you haven't done archaeology or done archaeology abroad, but maybe you've traveled abroad and have some experience being abroad and living in other countries, or maybe you haven't been involved in an archaeological research project, but you have been involved in similar types of research projects at your undergraduate school. Just really trying to think creatively about how you might be able to sell. What we're more broadly interested in is things like you're ready to do graduate level research, you're ready to potentially go abroad and do, live in another country for a number of years. things like that that are sort of kind of embedded within, having done field work or having done laboratory work or having done sort of museum work. And so again, I realize that that's probably frustrating in the sense that I'm not telling you, well, you need a field school and 2 years of field experience or you're not getting in here. Certainly that kind of stuff is helpful, but we don't see that as a sort of a barrier for entry if a candidate can sort of explain other ways that they've had sort of these kind of important types of experience.
Thank you, Andrew. So shifting then sort of back to those explicit requirements we laid out in the application. Sort of, Laurel, I was wondering if you could talk about recommendation letters. What does a good rec letter look like, and how, what should people ask for? I know this is kind of one of those, again, tacitly sort of accepted, unsaid things that I myself was not sure about in the application process.
Yes, thank you.
Laura, can I jump in?
Yes.
We have a Q&A question too about this. So I want to bring in another specific dimension, which is people that have taken time off as well. Like if you've been working in CRM after undergrad and stuff like that. So if you can, in your question, address like people coming from various backgrounds and who they should ask as well.
I totally can. That's awesome. I forgot to say something with when we were talking about the writing samples, and a question came up in the Q&A that I clicked that I would answer live. So let me address that a little bit first, and then I'll turn to the letters of recommendation. The question came up with writing samples as to whether or not 2 short things or multiple short things could be submitted. They can be. I would caution you to think about whether or not those 2 short things together can serve to answer the question that we have when we're reading them about the ability to make and to develop and support an archaeological argument. So, and again, thinking of the coherence of your whole package, are you stressing that you want to be public facing? Do you want to give us a couple of public facing pieces of writing that might go well together? On the other hand, we're going to need to know that you can write good course papers that are research papers that are longer. So you would want to maybe address in your writings, in your letter, how that sits together. It's a small point. I hope I answered your question. But now back to this issue of letters of recommendation, which can be really scary for anyone. They're particularly scary if you have taken time off and done other things. And I think, again, it's worth thinking about it from the perspective of what are we getting from these letters? How do they fit in this kind of picture of us seeing a coherent package of you and what you have done in the past and what you want to do? So the best letter writers are people who, and again, you're thinking of this as 3 people together, no single person is going to accomplish all of it, but how do your letter writers together help us understand your passion, interest, preparation, and excellence as a future scholar? And that really, again, can be 3 people. If you've been out and you're working in CRM, it can be awesome to include one of your CRM people that you've worked with closely. That's deeply relevant information for us in terms of you as a budding archaeologist. Do you want to use 3 people from CRM? No, you want to be able to show us, again, that you have the academic side of things covered in a way that we can have confidence there. Best letters are written by people who know you well and can speak about your work rather personally, so that it's people you have cultivated relationships with that went beyond simply doing excellent work in class. That's worth thinking about even in preparation for applying, even in graduate school, thinking about having experiences with professors that lead to them being able to write you good letters for jobs. Same thing. The really excellent letters show us, they give us confidence in what they say because it's clear that the people writing them know you well. Now, I will say in soliciting letters, you want to be ahead of the game and talking to people in advance about what kinds of letters they would write. Help your letter writers by saying, this was a formative experience for me. It's something I would like you to refer to in my letter, so you can help your letter writers write good letters for you by the interaction you have with them around that.
Can I just add something about the reference letters? You need to take into account the different traditions of writing reference letters. We know that in the US, there is a tradition, and most people, I think, follow it, to write very often detailed and long reference letters. In many European countries, professors write very brief statements that are often matter of fact to do with courses that the student took or fieldwork and things like that. And they don't go into the narrative style of explaining the skills and the passion and all the kind of the things that make somebody a great candidate. So take that into account when you ask for reference. And of course, on our side, we also take that into account when we evaluate. And we are able to tell that, okay, here we have a very brief reference because of a specific national or other disciplinary tradition of writing letters in a different style. So that is important for you to know. And of course, as I said, on our part also, we do take it into account.
I would say also, I mean, it doesn't happen often, but we can deal with letters of recommendation that are not in English. We need to know that you speak English and can write in English. If your reference can write a much better letter for you in another language, we would prefer to have that.
Yeah, between us, we speak so many different languages in the Mediterranean. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I've got a bit of a broader question. This one for Andrew. Generally, what kind of academic backgrounds are successful in grad school applications for archaeology programs? I'm thinking along the lines of, like, for people not necessarily applying right now, but thinking about applying to archaeology grad programs later on, what majors should they be looking at? What kind of coursework should they be prioritizing? All of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so I think, one of the things that's most important about sort of, particularly when you get up to the application process, is that in that personal statement, you can really demonstrate that you have a command or an understanding of sort of archaeology or the field in terms of the theory, the methods, what the questions are that matter, things like that, that are really so crucial for a successful application. And so there definitely are certain degrees that are going to help you get that training, but there are also, I've seen really great applicants who might be coming from sort of a background that might not be totally obvious, but they've done the legwork to really get on top of sort of the current literature about what sort of matters in terms of research questions, theoretical approaches, that sort of thing. All of that said, I think if you look at where a lot of the students come from that end up at the Joukowsky, the common places are sort of classics program that have an archaeology component. It might be an art history program, particularly one that might have an archaeological program. If it is some of the few programs in sort of Egyptology or, things like that, those are also obviously logical places for folks to come from. A number of our students also come out of anthropology programs, particularly anthro programs that have archaeologists embedded. So obviously, studying in a program that has archaeologists, is a logical pathway, but, from university to university, where the archaeologists are actually living is pretty diverse. And I should say, obviously, also archaeology programs, particularly as they exist in Europe, is also another logical pathway. But again, what I really emphasize is if let's say you're coming out of, not one of those backgrounds, you can still do the legwork to prepare yourself by digging into the literature, by trying to sort of engage with the literature to write a sort of informed statement. That's as or more important than what your degree line says. Is it's that when we read your statement, we can say, yes, this is somebody who's interested in doing really exciting work that can operate at the level of a sort of what we would expect of a PhD student.
Perfect. And so for this last question, unless there's other Q&A questions, Yannis, we discussed various aspects of the application as they apply to international students, but I just wanted to turn it to you and ask if there's anything else about applying as an international student that you or anyone else would like to highlight.
Yeah, as you say, Mason, I think we have covered already lots of ground, and we are actually very happy to answer specific questions about that matter, because there may be different issues to consider depending on where prospective applicants are coming from. But I want to emphasize two things. One is that we are in the national department in terms of our composition as a faculty, and increasingly more and more as a graduate body as well. And of course, all of us as faculty work in other countries. Some of us work also in the US, but most all of us work also international in other countries all over the world. So we are very sensitive to that matter, to the internationalization of our institute and to our experience, and we always encourage people to apply. What I want to say is to encourage people to do so and not be discouraged by various matters to do with differences in the system, let's say between the US and other countries, or differences in the application process. There was a question earlier in the chat about funding, and I think that relates also to international students. As I said, as we said, all of us said, the system here is that our positions are fully funded. So that means that we have from the beginning have secured the number of positions from the university, and then we take the number of students based on the positions we have secured from the university. So your funding or not funding, whether you have funding or funding, doesn't actually shape or determine or kind of affect our decision. Our decision is based on merit, is based on all these criteria we've said, and whether we feel you'll make a great graduate student. And then once you get accepted, you'll get full funding on your project and all the support that you need to carry out graduate studies. Also, I want to say something again about the international students, and that's the area, the geographical area and the focus of your research. We are open to advising and guiding students to doing projects in many different parts of the world, irrespective of our own specialization. Now, we may be able to cover parts of the project in terms of theory, methodology, or the broader research question, and you may, or people may need to find another colleague and co-advisor to cover perhaps some geographical specialization we may not have within the institute. But more and more, we are actually broadening the scope and the remit of the institute to cover broader geographical areas and to be open to other regions of the world in which we do not have active fieldwork projects. So that sense of openness and inclusivity, also in terms of geography and theme, is something I want to emphasize. And also, just a final point, there was a question on chat about success rate and admission rate. And I don't know if you, Andrew or Laura, want to answer that.
But the acceptance rate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not high. We're a very competitive program.
About 4 or 5%, you would say?
Is it what?
4 or 5%, is that?
It's very dependent on year. Some years we get a lot of applications and some years we don't, whereas the number of people we're allowed to admit is really quite static. So because we offer funding to everyone that we admit, we don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of the number of people we take. Also, the question of advising came up. We advise our students very closely, so you get a lot of our time and attention, and that also means that we can't have an infinitely large student body. So yes, I would say that the rate is low. It's probably between 5 and 10% most years.
The one thing that I would add on to that is kind of the way, on one hand, the admission, how many students we can admit in a given year is in some sense somewhat static, but it actually bounces a little bit because what happens is the graduate school calculates how many students we should have overall and how admissions will get us to that number. And the good news, if you're applying this year, is we are under enrolled and that we will likely be allowed to do admit more students than we have necessarily in the past. And so, for example, this current year, we enrolled 4 graduate students, which is on the higher end for us, which means then the percentage that get through, the admissions process is higher. And we haven't been given our number for this admission cycle, but in light of the fact that we're sort of under enrolled right now, it's a promising sign that, chances will be better for applicants this year than those years when it might be a little bit leaner.
And maybe related, I mean, I don't want to discourage you from applying just because we're competitive. And so we didn't come up the issue of reapplication or of BA versus MA, but these are often concerns for applicants. Apply. You can apply again if you don't get in later. That it has happened that we let students in after having not let them in previously. And if you go off and have more experiences, sometimes some students have benefited from going and getting a master's degree or doing a post-bac in between. There's absolutely, if this is the place you want to be, you should apply, even if it's a reach at this point.
One thing I just saw somebody put up in the Q&A is a question of sort of geographic foci. Where do you go if you're especially interested in sort of Latin American archaeology? Traditionally, kind of the division in the programs has been, if you're interested in doing work in the Americas, you would apply through anthropology. And if you're more likely to be working sort of Mediterranean, sort of old world, it would be over here. And I would certainly say that that'll be true in this particular admission cycle. This could sort of change in the future, but right now, the folks that sort of mentor in sort of Latin American archaeology are primarily in anthropology and would be admitted through that program. And so I would definitely recommend applying through there. And occasionally, what does happen is we get applicants in one program or the other where we're like, they're probably a better fit over here or there, or vice versa. And we'll actually move applications across the programs. But that's generally how you want to think about where you would apply, particularly in this next application cycle.
And hang out with people in the other program.
Yeah, to add to that we are open to co-advising arrangements as well. This is, if people who are in anthropology want to work with specific professor at the institute, we have, ways to make that work through co-advising and vice versa. Something I think we should mention that.
Advising, classes, field work, you have access. If you come to Brown, you have access to all of this. I know etruscologists who've dug in Sudan, for instance, but we also, our anthropology students and our archaeology students take courses together all the time, as well as being advised together or across.
So as we're wrapping up here, just before we close out, I did want to put a couple links in the chat here. These are the general Q&A links. The one for our program specifically, that's the Zukowski Q&A, and then the general sort of Brown-wide grad school Q&A. And so if any of your questions weren't answered here, let's check there. They might be on there. And then I'll throw it to Andrew to sort of take us away here.
Yeah, the one I'll just throw up there. The other thing is if folks have any follow-up questions, a good place to start is sort of the general sort of institute email line. And I'll just put that up there in the chat as well as a good place for follow-up questions. But yeah, overall, I'm really happy that we had such a great turnout today, and I really encourage if folks do have any follow-up questions to reach out either with that general line or perhaps with some more targeted questions. And we're really interested in sort of helping sort of the next generation of archaeologists get into graduate school and get the training that they need to sort of move on and sort of make an impact sort of in the world. And so again, I thank everybody for attending. Thank my fellow panelists for joining, and I look forward to reading your applications in just a few months.